switch off your mic. Anuradha, please switch off your mic. Good afternoon, one and all. Welcome to the third and last of the webinars being hosted by the English Department of St. Stephen's College, Uruvur. The time is 2 p.m. and we begin our journey into the world of the mind. This is the first such venture by the department and also the first webinar series we have hosted. The series hopes to provide an avenue to delve into discussions on some psychological aspects of the quarantine, lockdown, and the age of COVID protocols, thus enabling us to better adapt to changes and cope with adversity in these precarious times. Due to the COVID-19 situation, many of us are there who have been forced to go back and live with their abusers in enforced silence, unable to re-talk about such crimes. It is on these aspects and more that our esteemed speaker will talk to us today. To introduce her and to welcome you all to the session, I invite our head of the department, Ms. Bindu Cherian, to speak to us a few words.
Thank you, Tina. I hope I'm audible. Good afternoon, everyone. At the very onset, let me welcome you all to the last session of this webinar series hosted by the Department of English, St. Stephen's College, Uruvur. We were focusing mainly on the COVID pandemic and how it had actually been influencing all of us, in fact, many of us, in many different ways. With this in mind, we are actually fortunate to have had with us a very resourceful and erudite persons throughout the webinar series. I consider it a great honor to welcome today among our midst Ms. Aparna Gopan, the resource person, to the last session entitled Unwrapping COVID, a Pandemic of Enforced Silence and Abuse. She's a communication and gender rights professional currently working with an NGO unit titled Elephant in the Room. A TEDx speaker and gender consultant for various government and corporate organizations, it is very apt that we have Ms. Aparna to handle this session. Welcome, ma'am. I use this opportunity to also thank the management and the principal for providing us this opportunity and the resources for successfully conducting this webinar. I also welcome Professor Lali Siriak, the principal, the motivating force behind the seminar. Next, I would like to welcome all the faculty members of this department who have been very energetic and on their feet ever since we have actually planned this webinar. And last but not the least, let me welcome all the participants who have kindly registered and shown us their support and cooperation. Thank you, welcome all of you, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Bindu ma'am, for those wonderful words. Now I invite a speaker of the day, Ms. Aparna Gopan, to speak to us.
Yes, I believe I'm audible. And hi, everybody. I'm Aparna. Like was said before, I am the founder of an organization called Elephant in the Room. So, Elephant in the Room, basically, it is a provocative movement which runs campaigns against taboos, So taboos like sex education, FGM, domestic abuse, menstruation, to name a few. And often I have trouble trouble explaining what elephant in the room is to the people I talk to. But today I think it should be a rather easy thing for me, because being literature or English students, you should all probably understand the concept and the phrase elephant in the room. However, just to do a thought experiment of sorts, I would really like all of you who are listening right now to just look at the nearest door next to you. Maybe most of you are in rooms or within closed walls. So if it could just look into the next door, the door that is right next to you, and imagine a big fat elephant walking into the room. Just imagine that there is an elephant coming through the room, and inside the room, which you are sitting at right now. And you know how an elephant is, it is pretty huge. It is really huge. And to share this small space with an elephant is really uncomfortable for you. Like, you can feel the elephant breathing, it is moving around, and with every movement, you are becoming more and more uncomfortable. And so, the most radical or the best logical answer is to get the elephant out. And to get the elephant out, you think you are not capable of doing that by yourself, because elephant is something really huge. It is something that has a mind of its own. It can harm you. You could potentially be trampled by the elephant. You could die. I don't know. There are endless possibilities of things that can go wrong if you try to deal with this particular elephant. And so, what you decide to do is to act like this elephant does not exist. So you look at the elephant, you know that it is making life uncomfortable for you, but you try to ignore it. You try to act like this elephant has not entered the room right now and is not making life uncomfortable for you. And this is a representation of how we live our everyday. And it is a representation of all of our daily realities. Because one way or the other, we are all living with uncomfortable topics that we know exist, but we do not want to deal with, that we do not want to talk about, that rather the society asked us not to talk about. Because once we address this issue, the next question is, what do we do about this issue? And there's nothing, or there is this feeling of helplessness that creeps down upon us, that makes us feel like there's nothing that can be done. So the best possible way to deal with this is to act like this does not exist. And these are the kind of issues and topics that we deal with in the organization as well. And that is probably the reason why I'm here on board as, let's say, somebody who knows the subject matter to talk about how this pandemic is not just a pandemic of COVID-19 or of a particular virus strain, but it is a pandemic of enforced silence and abuse. And before we dwell into such larger topics that are probably sound unrelatable to you, let's start with something that at least a few of us can relate with. And I should warn you now that this is going to be a slightly participatory session. So if anybody wants to have your video on and your connection permits you, it is totally okay. And at times I would really like if many of you could unmute yourself and participate in the questions I ask and so on. So the first one that I'd be talking about right now, to give you an idea of what we'll be going through today, is about this very viral challenge that most of us participated in, the black and white challenge. Can I know if anybody can unmute yourself and say if you have participated in the black and white challenge, or if you have heard about the black and white challenge? It could also be kind of like a breaking the ice, you know. We can also mention that yes, somebody.
Yes, ma'am. I have participated in the black and white challenge by posting the picture.
All right. And may I ask you what your reason was to join in this challenge?
Just to make sure that the physical appearance is not everything that people should look into. There are more to it. We should not be looked into should not be judged by the external appearance, maybe.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Atira. And I think Tina has also commented saying she had, and Shruti has also even have joined the challenge. So if one more person could actually tell me if there is a different reason for which you joined the challenge. to get a general idea of where we all stand.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi. Hi, Megha. Yes.
So, yeah, I participated in the black and white challenge. It was basically a solidarity to the Turkish women
Mhm.
feminicide. That's why I did it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, so actually, the black and white challenge, for those of you who do not know, so during the quarantine time, all of us have been trying to find our own ways to deal with the lockdown. So there have been different kinds of challenges put forth by companies, by brands, by different kind of organizations or systems that we all kind of took part in to show solidarity or to just while away our boredom or to just to win a prize or anything. And black and white challenge came under the radar because it took the internet by storm just about last month, and even this month many people are putting it up. Most celebrities started putting it up with the hashtag black and white challenge, just black and white pictures of themselves, and they tagged more friends of them to put up such black and white pictures. And this particular issue, it got a lot of support and a lot of criticism because of the number of reasons that people thought this was or number of movements that it thought it represented. One, like Megha said, it is one main reason is because it was started in Turkey by Turkish women who were waking up every day to see the black and white pictures of dead women in their country. Every other day they wake up to see a black and white picture of a dead woman in the country, and they were feeling helpless at a particular moment because the government was not doing anything about it. And not just not doing anything about it, the government actually decided to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention of 2011 that they signed in the year 2011 at Istanbul. It was actually, the Istanbul Convention is a European treaty. It's actually the first of this kind of international treaty that was put forth by the Council of Europe against domestic violence and violence against women. And Turkey, after as all these cases of women or dead women were coming up, or violence against women were rising in Turkey. For example, in 2019, almost 474 women died in Turkey. And with these rising numbers, the government decided to withdraw from this convention that actually was a solace to many women. And this, along with the number of cases that we're seeing every day, this is what led women to start putting up pictures, black and white pictures of themselves as a stand to the government to tell them that we believe that tomorrow this could be our picture. And there is a reason to this, because almost 60% of these women who died in just the year 2019, or about 60% of them were killed by their husbands or partners. And around 59% of these women were killed at home. Basically, they did not do anything. They did not even step out from the security of the four walls of their house. They sat at home, and that was the reason for their murder, because they shared a space with their abuser. And so this black and white challenge basically was to tell the government that we think that tomorrow we could be one of this percentage. We could be one of this one of this number. And this was just one of the movements that the black and white challenge represented, because for some people who put up the black and white pictures, it was about standing in solidarity with Alexandria Cortez. Alexandria Cortez, a US representative, she was actually called, in quotes, a fucking bitch by a representative, Ted Yoho, on the steps of the US Parliament. And this, again, it took to news, it became viral, and people started putting up black and white pictures in solidarity with Alexandria Cortez, who did nothing to earn the tag of a fucking bitch. She was just a woman doing her business, being vocal about her rights and being vocal about the rights of her constituency, which earned her that tag. And so people thought it was unfair, and they decided to join in the movement and put up black and white pictures. Another set of people put up these pictures because they thought there wasn't enough representation of Black women lives. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we know about all the survivors or all the victims who are men. We do not really know many of the names of the women survivors or victims. And so for them, it was a solidarity to the Black Women Lives Matter movement. And for some others, like the first person who talked to us said, it was about body image, or it was about women supporting women, or it was basically just about solidarity with regard to women being themselves and supporting each other. So the major debate on internet was about what does this black and white challenge represent? Does it represent the first issue, or does it represent the issue at Turkey, or does it represent the many number of reasons that I told you? And what actually shook me was the fact that there are the sheer number of movements, or the sheer number of causes around gender and gender equality that this particular movement in this day and age could represent. It could be this, it could be that, it could be n number of things, because there are n number of issues around gender, around domestic abuse, around gender equality that this particular challenge can represent, that people are actually fighting about what it represents. And that is what shook me, the fact that there are so many such issues. And that actually took me back to my own understanding about gender, to my own experiences with things like race, gender, caste, class, and all the other intersectionalities that we deal with. And so I started by thinking about the first or the most prominent experience, or the first time that I thought about gender. When was the first time in my childhood that I was made aware of something like gender, or my gender, for example? And before I tell my answer, maybe if all of us could, who are listening to this, could take just 30 seconds to 1 minute to think about the first or the most prominent event that made you think about gender, your gender, or gender in general. Just take 30 seconds to think about it, and one or two of you could share it with us. Yeah, if one or two of you could share with us the first time that you became aware that you were thinking about gender, or you were made aware of your gender. If you could tell us that event, or yes.
Hi,
Hi, yes,
uh,
Annie.
Annie. So,
Yes.
as a child, uh, I was told that my father is the head of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they would funnily joke that I am the tail of the family. And I would
Okay.
ask, why isn't mother the head of the family?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, I was a child and I was unaware about how I was born. I
Mm-hmm.
used to say that Amma is the one who gave birth to me.
Mm-hmm.
You have no role in that. And then
Mm-hmm.
yet you claim that you are the head of the family, and that was like
Yes.
very confusing for me.
All right. So this was the first time you confronted gender, or you start thinking about gender, right?
Yeah, like it is one of the prominent memories.
All right. Anyone else? Maybe one or two more people. Okay, somebody has mentioned in the chat, when a friend of mine, Victor, when a friend of mine in school said that I looked very feminine and that I didn't behave manly enough. Yes, that could make you go down a trip about gender and think about gender. Yes, that's true. Thank you, Victor. Anyone else? Maybe we'll take one more.
Hi, my name's Annie. Again,
Hi.
another Annie. Hi.
Yes.
Okay. So the first time I remember was when I was very young.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the third daughter. My
Mm-hmm.
parents have got three daughters. I'm the youngest. And I
Mm-hmm.
still remember a neighbor coming and asking my mother, how many kids do you have? And she said, I have got three daughters. And the neighbor seemed surprised, why you don't have a son? And I was very irritated by that, and there was a big discussion at home that why did she say that.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother found it very difficult to explain to me that they felt that a family was only complete if a son is there. And I remember that was one of the reasons why I said I'm not less than any boy. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm quite tomboyish. I made sure that I did everything that presumably boys are supposed to do. So that is
Mm-hmm.
the first confrontation I had with
With
gender.
gender. All right. Thank you, Annie. Is there anyone else who wants to share, or I'll just wait 2 seconds to see if anybody comes up, or else we continue. Yes. So there are these memories that you have, and for me, my memory, or my first, the first, I think the one that I really became aware of my gender was when I was a young child. I used to go for these dance classes. So the dance tutor, she used to live quite near my place, and so I used to go there, and a couple of other kids used to come there. We used to be taught dance lessons, and then we move back to our houses. That's what happens, and usually happens during vacations. And when you are born in the kind of family that I'm born in, even if it's a very short distance to the place that you're going to, you always have to be accompanied by an adult. And so I always have to wait for someone to come and get me from the house to go back to my house after the classes are done. And so one fine day, the class got over, and my father he forgot to come and pick me up. And the teacher, she really had to leave for some emergency. So she leaves me at home with her son. And that day, actually, my brother was with me too. He happened to be there that day. So he left the both of us with her son, and she left for this emergency that she had. And I waited a long while, and we made a couple of calls. And after a while, I was picked up, and I went back home. So naturally, I went home to complain to my mother that I wasn't picked up on time. That was very embarrassing. That it was that I had to wait and waste my time. I could have used it for something else. And as I was complaining to my mom, she asked me, "So you were alone in the house?" And I was like, "No, she left us with her son." And immediately after that, a lot of chaos happened in the house. I do not really exactly remember how, but my mother took me. She forcibly took me to this room. She stripped me of my clothes, and she started checking for something on my body. And I did not know what it was that she was looking for. She was crying, she was complaining, she was talking, she was saying my father shouldn't have waited, he should have gone and caught me immediately and all of it. And I really did not know what was happening. So I was asking her, "What is happening? Are you searching for something? What is happening?" And my mother asked me whether I was touched inappropriately, whether I was in the room alone with the son and not my brother, and whether I felt any discomfort. And I said no to everything. I just cried and said no to everything. She did not explain to me what she was doing that day, or what her fears were, or that she really feared that I was abused by a strange man. But what she told me is that I'm never to stay in the same house or the same close room with a strange man who's not from my family. I'm not supposed to. And I asked her, what about my brother who was with me right then? Why are you not checking him, right? Because he and we were together there. And she said, "No, he's a boy. You are a growing woman, and that is why you need to be careful. He does not have to be careful, but you have to be because you are a woman." And this, I believe, is the day that I really started thinking about gender and what gender means. And I think there are a few questions in the chat. Maybe know how old were you at the time? I think I should have been in my 5th or 6th grade. I'm not exactly sure. So I probably was in my 5th or 6th grade when this incident happened. And this is the striking memory that I have of when I started thinking about gender and gender inequality, to say. And this, actually, we had this discussion yesterday with a group of people that I was doing a webinar with. And what we realized, or what came up in discussion, is that all of our memories of this of our first confrontation with gender, or anything relating to gender, actually was not a very pleasant experience. It wasn't a memorable experience. It wasn't something that we remember fondly saying, "Oh, this was the first time I started thinking about gender." All the experiences that we have had were all quite unfortunate, were quite things that we do not really want to remember, or something that we do not remember fondly. If there's anybody who has had a positive experience of their first confrontation with gender, you can unmute yourself, or you can actually put it in the chat. But what I'm trying to say is, this is how gender, a concept, or something as complex as gender, is introduced in our lives. Most of us have very, very unfortunate memories about this particular concept, or this particular issue in society, or this particular intersectionality. And when I started thinking about this, it actually took me down a rabbit hole. And that is when I came across this book by Charles King. It is called The Reinvention of Humanity, the story of race, sex, gender, and the invention of culture. So this book, basically, it is something that many anthropologists like. This book is a story of a group of anthropologists, mostly women, who revolutionized the idea or the way we think about humanity. So there were these notions that we had about race, about sex, about culture, about gender. And in this book, these group of anthropologists, they kind of say that all those notions that we have had were probably a little, conditioned, or they were a bit too orthodox. So they told us how the idea of fitting in, or the idea of gender or sex or cultural differences or differences between different humans came about, and how they have progressed through time and age. And that was quite a revelation for me. And I'm suggesting this book to most of you here, also because I know that right now I'm talking to a group of people who can really affect change. Most of you are people who want to be educators in one way or the other. You want to be lecturers, or you want to be college professors, or you want to do something to do with educating people. And that, I think, is the primary reason why I'm mentioning this book, because we've also been talking about through the webinar series that we have been having of late, we have been talking about inclusive education. And every time or every other time, people or institutions claim that they are really proponents of inclusive education, and their curriculum is all about inclusive education. What I have found out is that more often than not, this tag of being somebody who's dealing with inclusive education is a sign of tokenism, right? Like, for example, would including just a book by a woman writer, or a Black woman writer, or a writer from the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, would that make education inclusive? Would just including a title or a book or a work by a person of color make your educational curriculum or your method of teaching inclusive? These are the questions that I think we as a group of educators should actually be pondering about right now, because all these issues that happened during COVID, the abuse, the issues of abuse, or the issues of enforced silence, or the number of victims and survivors living with their abusers, it did not happen in a day or two. It has been happening for a long, long while. And now is probably not the best time to discuss this, because right now, we're all stuck. We're all stuck in these rooms with abusers, and there is this sense of helplessness. What should have happened is that the groundwork should have been put very early on. It should have been put very early on from the systems, from the schools that we went to, or from the colleges that we went to, or the other educational spaces that we went to. We should probably have had, when you're talking about or discussing a work or a book by a person of color, or by a woman, a Black woman, or by a trans Black woman, not mentioning or not going through the issues that they face, not talking about race, or not talking about the intersectionality of gender and race, it negates the fact that you chose that book. So when you choose a particular piece of work or particular article, or you choose to discuss that, you also need to discuss the issue that the person who wrote that went through, or what that book actually represents, than just going through a literal representation of what that work is. And I think that will go a long way in creating a space where it is where people would feel that their experiences are similar. For example, this black and white challenge, talking about black and white challenge, or the whole issue that is happening in Istanbul, the Istanbul Convention of 2011, how would talking any of this in a classroom in Kerala help the students here? If that is the question, the thing is, I will give you 2 case studies. So one of the case studies happened last month. So it was a call that we got. It was a person, a well-wisher, calling about a child who he has been sexually abused by someone who's very close to the family. So this was found out that the child was sexually abused, and the issue was raised in the family and in the community, and it happened during the lockdown. And so there was very limited interaction between the well-wisher and the family of the survivor. However, what the family decided was to just let it go, to just not make a big problem out of it, because it was a boy child who was abused. And They did not want allegations, or they did not want the community coming to know about it, and whatever the reasons. So they decided to drop this issue. And the well-wisher called us to take up this issue because when especially it is a minor who is being abused, the family has the power to decide what to do with what comes after, whether to make it a legal issue, whether to make it a public issue, whether to take an action about it. The family has full rights. Nobody else can really intervene up to a point. And that is why the well-wisher called us to ask us to talk to the family about the importance of probably addressing this issue, of getting help for this child, of getting anything, any help, of really helping out the child in some way or the other, and in maybe proceeding in a legal way. And another case issue that I would like to share with you is about a girl. She's studying in college. Her friend called us actually, and her friend told us that she was really worried about her friend because she's not been available on calls for a few days. She's online, so she knows nothing has happened to her life, but she's just not available over calls. And she called us because she believes that she's being abused or physically abused by her father, who she thinks is an alcoholic. So this particular girl child, she turns up to college with marks on her hands, with black and blue eyes, and she does not discuss this with anybody. She just yeah, she comes to college and she goes, and it's this friend who regularly checks in with her. And every time this girl is absent in the college for 2 or 3 days, the next time she comes, she always has a burnt mark on her body or a mark of abuse on her body. And so she suspects that she lives in a very abusive family setup. And in COVID, not being able to reach out to her friend had made her really worried for her safety. And these are just two case studies of the number of cases that we got ever since COVID began. So what has happened right now is, while for most of us it is COVID lockdown has been a time for us to get back to hobbies or to reconnect with family members we have not been connecting with. For most others, it is to live in these huge rooms with their abusers. And when you come from a very abusive family, whether it be an abusive or alcoholic father you have, or an abusive partner you have, or an abusive helper you have, what you realize quite early on, even if you're a child, is that the more time that you spend with an abuser, more the chances of abuse. So, for example, if you are seated on the dining table, say you're a child, and your abusive father is on the same dining table as you, you gobble up your food as fast as you can so that you can just exit that scene with him, so that you are not subjected to abuse. You just exit and you go back to your room, or you go to school, or you go to a park, or you go to theater. You just make sure that you are not stuck in a situation with the abuser as much as you can. So what happens right now under COVID is that there are no other external spaces that you can run off to. You can just run off to your room, which again, the abuser probably have access to. And what happens while you sit in the room is that you go down a downward spiral. You start thinking about why you. You start thinking whether things would have been different had you been some other color, had you been pretty enough, had you been smart enough, had you been born in some other gender but not yours. And you start thinking about all these things that probably made you vulnerable, or that probably made the abuser choose you. And when this happens under lockdown, with no support system, like for example, the support system that I'm talking about is mostly, especially when it is the case of minors, most of the cases of abuse are reported by teachers, are reported by educators who see these signs. They see the signs of distress in kids. They see forms of physical abuse in kids, and they decide to call up helplines and tell, we suspect that this kid is being abused and we want your intervention. So under COVID, when there is no support system like that working externally to support you, to see these signs, to catch it early on, and to tell somebody, what happens is you just sit in this downward spiral thinking about how helpless you are and how this is never going to end. Because think about it, since March 25, we have been going through this cycle, through this endless cycle of just getting stuck over and over and over again. So there is this feeling of helplessness that I will never be able to get out of the situation. Just between March 25 and May 31, statistically, according to reports, around 1,477 cases have been filed of domestic abuse. And this is only 14% of the number of cases that we think have happened all along the nation. So it is way bigger than the figures that the women in Turkey are fighting for. And we probably should be on streets asking our government to give us better support systems, or to give us better means of coping with this issue, but we are not. And that is why I suggested this book, as well as the many reasons for education to be more inclusive, by not just means of tokenism, but by means of discussing these intersectionalities of issues of gender, of race, of caste, of the many ways of abuse, of why it happens, of how gendered abuse happens, and so on. So now, to get to a kind of a global perspective, actually, it's not just the case of COVID or the COVID imposed lockdown. Every time a natural calamity strikes, it is the women and gender minorities and women and kids who are affected most. Like, for example, if I can give you, yes, an example, in 2004, when the tsunami hit, a lot of people died, a lot of livelihoods were lost. But you will be shocked to hear that the number of women who died were 4 times more than the number of men. And in Bangladesh in 1991, when they were going through a situation of a dire crisis and cyclones, the 91% of people who lost their lives actually were women. And this is not a coincidental statistics. It's not that all these women happen to be there, or these women, it isn't something that isn't layered. It is pretty much layered, because every time a natural crisis happens, it is the most vulnerable of the communities that get affected. And mostly it is the gender minorities. It is women, it is children, and it is also because for generations, it is these people who have been rendered powerless. It is the women or gender minorities in any community who do not have land rights, who do not have legal rights, who do not have rights to their own body, and sexual and reproductive rights. So what happens is, when a natural crisis hits, it is these people who will bear the brunt first. And reports also suggest that every time a natural calamity hits, like whether it be COVID, whether it be floods, whether it be cyclone, the gender-based violence also increases in direct proportion to the gravity of the crisis. The number of human trafficking cases in most communities increase when a crisis happens. And gender-based violence, it is not always physical abuse. It's not always sexual abuse. It can be many forms. It is also forced marriage. It is also forced child marriage. It is also the different kinds of abuse that comes under the radar. And all these things go up. Globally, actually, every time a crisis hits, there is almost a 90% increase in the number of kids who are given away in child marriages, because immediately the thought that strikes the family is that the woman or the gender minority is going to be a liability for them, and you need to marry that person off immediately. And then again comes the idea of the financial transaction that are marriages. So all of that, being what I'm trying to say is that every time a natural calamity strikes, or we get unprecedented times, like something that is quite out of the normal, every time a calamity strikes, these vulnerable genders and vulnerable communities are left with no support system to see through it, because they are not financially independent, and the legal framework, or there is a lack of legal framework that helps them. And there is also this lack of trust to any system. So for centuries, we have been the justice system has been unfair to us, the society has been unfair to us, and our stories and our narratives. And so there is this general disregard, or there is this general distrust that most survivors and abusers have, saying, every time somebody is carjacked, or a person or somebody is robbed, and the person tells the story of how they were robbed or how they were carjacked, nobody ever doubts it. Nobody ever asks, oh, did that really happen? But every time somebody comes up and tells their story of sexual abuse, the first question or the first reaction that they get is, oh, did that really happen? Is that really true? So it is not a stray incident. It has become the norm, actually. So if you did notice, when the world was being when the entire world was talking about sexual abuse through the hashtag Me Too, every other time a person comes up with a story against a celebrity or against an actor or against a known face, the first question was whether the story is true. The first question was not why it happened or why the person or the perpetrator is still free to roam about the streets. The first question is this question of incredulity. Did it really happen? And that is why that is why we really need to consciously create spaces that people can trust. And that needs to happen, I believe, in these educational institutions, like in colleges, like in schools, because this is where most, especially in a conservative society like us, where most of the people spent the most time with after school, after their house. So from in terms of a legal framework or in terms of just a ear that is listening, I think that creating such conscious spaces in our educational institutions is very necessary. And I think that can't be done in a day or a two. It can only be done through a process of making education inclusive, by not just tokenism of including, a reading by a disabled poet or by a Black writer or a trans writer. It also should go around discussing these issues of intersectionalities. When you're talking, for example, you're talking about a work written by a Black woman writer, you talk about the issues of race. You talk about the global issues that are happening right now. You talk about Black Lives Matter. You talk about Black Women Lives Matter. You talk about the black and white challenge and what it represents. So these things do not become trivial. These things do not become just token activism. It becomes something that can further something with a long-lasting impact. And yes, I think I will probably get more redundant if I talk about the things that I keep talking about. So I think I will open up for questions now. If you can ask me questions, and I can further help you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for that highly enlightening and informative session. Gender-based violence is a systematic problem that needs to be understood holistically, and an accurate solution for the problem needs to be found. We'll take questions from the audience. You can post it in the chat box there, or you can also unmute yourself and ask the question. I'll give you a few seconds, a few minutes to type your questions. We'll wait for the questions, ma'am.
Yes, definitely. You can also, we also deal with gendered cyberbullying a lot, especially under COVID. So what we have realized is that most people with their frustrations, they decide to take it out online because they have no other avenues of taking it out, because alcohol is also restricted. So all their frustration usually comes out online. And online, what we have realized is most of the violence is against women or people of gender minority. So if there is an issue, for example, that is being talked about, and there is an argument that happens in the comment boxes that come below, if it is a woman who has a strong opinion against the person who has put it up, after one or two comments, the war is not about the issue anymore. It suddenly becomes a character assassination of the woman. It becomes how many people she sleeps with, what the kind of what the kind of clothes that she wears, what is the kind of character that she has. And so this has also been one of the issues that we have been dealing with, gendered cyberbullying. So if any of you need help with regard to that, or if you need psychological help to deal with such issues, you can also post those questions even here or even out of the session. Yes.
We have some questions in the chat box. Would you like me to read them out to you?
No, I'll read it. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
So one is about, can you please tell about gender bias? So to talk about gender bias, there's something as huge as gender bias. Well, yeah. So even when I asked you actually to do that thought experiment of thinking of that first or the most prominent, I think somebody's video is not unmuted, so I'm just hearing a lot of. Yeah, thank you. All right. So even that first incident that I asked all of us to think about, for most of us, the first incident is an incident of gender bias. It is about how conditioned we have become, or the society has. Or the society has been in showing these biases, and it reflects in almost all avenues of our being, whether it be in gender pay gap, or it be in gender abuse, or gendered cyberbullying, in all of this. So what happens is, again, gender as such is a power structure. So there are people who are at the top of the power structure, and then there are the others who come below, who go through the vulnerabilities of it. But then again, there is this assumption that gender bias is something that affects only the vulnerable genders. That is, it only affects women, or it only affects the gender minorities in the wrong way or in a negative way. But that is wrong. Gender bias, or all these gender stereotypes, it affects all of us in the society quite equally, whether it be the notion that men should be more manly, men should be earning, men cannot be housemakers, men cannot be nurturing, men cannot be seen as anybody who's weak, or men are not allowed to have emotions. It actually do affect men, and this does give rise to toxic masculinity that we see in society. And like I said, it is a huge topic to deal with. And gender bias, over years, through religion, through systems of education, through systems of interaction that we have, through the judicial system, through all these systems, we have made it so ingrained that it is quite difficult to unlearn this. And so this is something that I always say educators, something that I always tell parents, that you do not have to, that all you have to do is to make sure that you do not teach gender biases to children or to the new generation, or that you propagate such gender biases. All you have to make sure is that you do not teach these gender biases, because nobody comes to this world learning these. They just see this and they acquire, or they get conditioned into believing this. So just do not become complicit in teaching gender biases. As long as you do not teach gender biases, there is no there is no issue. Right now, what we are all going through is we have been conditioned through these gender biases and gender stereotypes, and we have grown up, and it is difficult for us now. We have to unlearn now. There is a process of unlearning that we have to do. But when you're just born and you're not fed these thoughts of gender biases and gender stereotypes, if a child is not told, you know what, play with these things, you know what, you are supposed to do this, you do not get this food because you do not want the nutrition, it's only then that people start thinking about these gender biases. And that's why that thought experiment I told you about, thinking about your first and most prominent encounter with gender, helps you. And I only asked you to think about your first encounter with gender. Just make a timeline after the session, maybe whenever you have the time, sit and think about this timeline. Every time you confronted gender, in what setting was it, in what geographic setting was it, and how was your interaction? Was it a pleasant memory? Was it something memorable? And what could have changed in that situation? And just make sure that you create such situations for children or for other people, so that they at least they at least come up in a unconditioned setup. Yes. And next is, how can we deal with the issue of incredulity when it comes to sexual abuse? How do we create a space of trust for more and more people to come out and share their stories bravely? And that, I believe, is that all of us need to, what we basically need to do right here. I actually suggest that all of you do try out this Netflix mini series, Unbelievable. It is a mini series. There are only 3 to 4 episodes, I believe, and it actually answers a lot of questions for us. It does not give us gyan, or it does not tell us anything in bullet points what to do, but it tells us, or it shares a particular story which makes us aware of the biases that we live under. So what to deal with this issue of incredulity, what basically we should do is be very open listeners, because it is true, yes, it is true that there are false sexual allegations, there are false cases of abuse that people do file and people talk about for many reasons that they have. But when you look at it statistically, with the number of cases that go unreported, with the number of cases that are reported but the perpetrators still walk free, the number of cases that get dismissed because of lack of evidence, it is huge. The number of such cases happening, or the statistically, that can happen more than somebody filing a false allegation. And there is this narrative that people have started building, saying your Me Too story is just for you to get famous. And that is something that I do not understand, right? Because can any of you tell me the name of the victim or the survivor that we remember? None of us know the name of the victim or the survivor, so how are they benefiting, how are they becoming famous? And over the years we have realized that every time you come out with your story of abuse, you get more harm than you get any advantages. It's not like, no, somebody comes and offers you a job, or somebody comes and offers you a better position because you said you were abused. No, you get a lot of gendered cyberbullying, you get a lot of abuse, you get a lot of threats, and that is the reality of the situation. So nobody really aspires, or nobody wants to make their life more dramatic. Nobody wants to receive rape threats or death threats. What people want, what people do when they come out with their stories, is to share their experience so that they have a sense of justice, so that more people feel empowered to come up with their stories. So what we basically have to do is nothing. Just do not create a hostile environment, or do not propagate biases, or do not propagate such claims that people come up with Me Too stories to become famous. And if you just remain open enough, I think people would trust you to come up and tell their stories. And that's why I told, especially in these college setups or in classroom setups, if you are aspiring to be professors and so on, when you discuss works, make sure that you discuss the global issues that surround around it. Discuss a work, and after that talk about this black and white challenge, or talk about case studies that are happening around the world, to make sure that they understand that their experience is not that different, it is quite similar. So empower them to share their story, and further on maybe you can connect them to an organization that can help or whatever. But that first step is to always consciously make sure that the other person or the other people know that this is a safe space where you can discuss your issues, and it wouldn't be uncomfortable. It would be a stepping stone to something new. It would be a non-judgmental space where you can share your story and you would not be doubted, where you will not be called a liar for sharing your story of abuse, because that's what people are most scared about. When you are telling your story of rape or abuse, and you see more people commenting on it saying, I will abuse you for having told your story of abuse, it does not make sense to you to open your mouth anymore, right? You just silence your story and you decide to live in silence. So just make sure that you do not create such a hostile environment, and then people should be open enough to discuss their stories or share their stories with you. It also helps to maybe ask at times, if you see, like the friend who called us, saying, I am scared of my friend because I see these signs that she could be living in an abusive family. Asking, are you okay? Is there something that you would like to share? All of these can help as well. Um, okay, next.
Hello, ma'am. Can I
Yes.
ask you something?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to ask you about the cure people and the cure community during the lockdown, because most of these people, they have left their home, they have left the space which is so called a safe space, because they were never accepted in that space in the first place. So these people, they left the home to universities and hostels which they found a home in, and now they are forcefully taken back to their house because of this whole pandemic and everything. So what do you think about their identity crisis and all the pressure happening to them, and how can they be in a space which is socially accepted as a safe space which is not safe or home to them? Thank you.
True. It's a very relevant question, Megha, because we do get so many such cases under COVID. Because under COVID, what has happened is most of the it works again under many intersectionalities and layers, right? So most of the times, the gender minorities are also always economically not independent either, because maybe there are biases in the workplace or in their educational system which made them drop out, which made them incapable of getting a job, which made them get a job and quit. Because even though the workplace was apparently inclusive, there were in policies that made sure that they were not being bullied because of their effeminate qualities or because of their way of being or because of their gender identity. So most often they are also economically quite disadvantaged or economically not independent enough to probably move out of the house of their parents, or to find a hostel where they can pay every day, or so on and so forth. And because of that, yes, most of them do share or are forced to live with their families. And there are two ways to it, because one, many of them have the people who have already disclosed their gender identity, whose parents know and do not approve of. It is yeah, it is quite it's quite a horrible way to live, to share a space, to share space with people who cannot even accept you for the identity that you choose for yourself, who think that they need to be converted, or that they are bringing such bad name to the family. And all these conversations keep coming up, right, during dinner table, or when you are passing, or these conversations keep coming up. And it is quite a horrible way to live, knowing that your identity is being not accepted and not questioned. And what can we do about it is, like, again, I told you, now is not the time when we should have, when ideally we shouldn't be talking about these issues right now. We should have established systems. We should have we should have been talking about this from way long, because here the intervention is not really just for the survivor or for the person from the queer community. Here the intervention that is necessary is for the parents, actually. So if somebody if there is a family member, or if there is somebody who can sit and discuss this with the parents, because most of the times these parents wouldn't even be willing to discuss it. It's a big fat elephant in the room. So if there is a way to get them to sit and discuss these issues, to show them a movie that probably gives them a better idea of what their child might be going through, to sit and have this conversation with them, where probably the parents, they also came up in a very conditioned setup, where the church asked them to be transphobic, or their educational system asked them to be transphobic, or their parents, or their society, or their friends asked them to be transphobic. Nobody is born transphobic, right? So if we could reverse that for them, if there could be a support system for the parents to sit and talk to them, and to get them to understand the issue, and at the same time a support system for the member of the queer community to open up about their story, to share the story, to have a safe space where they wouldn't be cyberbullied for displaying their gender identity in ways they want to, and in celebrating it. All of that can go a long way. But like I told you, it is an ongoing process. It can't be what can we do now that they are going through abuse. It has to be, why did we as a society let things go so bad that right now there are millions of people trapped in houses with their abusers, with no support system, with nothing to do but sit and cry. Yeah, so it is a difficult situation, and it is also very contextual. It depends on the kind of setup it is, and the kind of parents they have, and the kind of upbringing they had. It all depends. But there are multiple things that we can do about it contextually. So if we can know the relevant context details, and if you know such details of such people, maybe you can reach out to communities or organizations that can guide you better with reference to the personal context that they are going through. Anybody else want to ask?
We have a question from the
Yes.
YouTube stream. I'd just like to read it to you. It's from Pinky Anthony. Many a times we are unaware of our rights. This enforces silence. In this case, how can legal literacy be delivered to the commoner?
Yes, like that again. So this is where I think it can't be, there is no one way of delivering legal literacy to people, because yeah, there is not one place where everybody in the world comes always. There has to be multiple avenues of it. So our government has started few initiatives of these law lessons in schools and colleges, but the thing is, most of them do not deal with issues like domestic violence. It does not deal with child sexual abuse. It does not deal with sex education and so on. So what I believe is, even beyond this legal literacy reaches the people, what we need to empower them is with the knowledge of knowing when they're abused. Because first, many people do not recognize that they are being abused or they are in an abusive setup until much further. And this gap we need to address first, from school, from in colleges, in all these institutions, or even at homes. We need to have proper systems of delivery, of communicating what abuses, what consent is, what and different and the rights that we have to our body, and the limits, or the private limits that we can, or the boundaries that we all need to respect. And it goes either ways. Like for example, in my house, I come from a household where I was always told to not get raped, but I never saw my brother getting lessons on not to rape anybody. So it needs to go either ways. It does not have to be you get all the women and empower them through karate lessons or give them legal literacy lessons. It also goes to getting everybody talking about gender, talking about sex, talking about consent, talking about the importance of yes means yes, talking about what affirmative consent is, talking about your body, your rights, and your right to say no. So it needs to start from that those small systems in place that needs to be normalized, that needs to happen on an everyday basis. Not like an event, not like an event of today we are going to talk about sex education. No, every day it needs to be an ongoing process where every day you discuss these issues as normal as you can, as routinely as you can. And it needs to happen in home, it needs to happen in schools, it needs to happen in colleges. And then as we progress, we all work in different fields, right? So for example, if you work in a corporate setup, you need to talking to your authorities to set up a panel to talk about these things, or an anti-sexual harassment policy, and to deal through it will help. If you are if you are an art creator, if you want to create art around these topics, because most of the time all these laws are too hard for the common man to bite. So make bite-sized capsules out of it, make art out of it, make movies out of it. So when or even criticize existing work. For example, when Arjun Reddy released, if it had released probably a few years earlier, I don't think it would have got the kind of backlash it got today. But today people have reached a level where they can criticize work by famous people, saying, this was wrong, this is not something that I can approve of. And all these kinds of confrontations and criticisms, and creating work like movies or books that talk about these issues, and that talk about a culture of affirmative consent. All of this, I think, is the way to go, because there is no one way of giving out this information to people. It needs to happen in avenues, and whichever field you work in, whichever avenue you work in, you can always bring in this idea. And it does not just have to be giving lectures on it or giving gyan on it. It can also be sometimes, say somebody in your workplace made a sexist joke. Do not shut up about it. Question it right then and there. It has an impact. It has an effect. It makes them think twice the next time they talk about it. And that means one less abuse that a child who is growing up hears. And all these tiny things that we do will have an impact. So let it start from our everyday, from our every minute. By the time we start thinking about it, to the kinds of ways in which we can implement it in our daily lives, in our own settings. We do not have to wait for the judicial system to make the change, or for the government to make legal education available everywhere. We can access it, and we can make bite-sized capsules about it, and tell people, question people. Every time we stand up for ourselves, we are actually educating somebody to do it for themselves. So I think it happens in these tiny little ways.
But we have a question from Deepa Manjali.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Deepa Manjali.
Yes.
What are some of the changes that we can bring in our curriculum to save our children from gender bias?
All right. So yes, and this again is very contextual. So it depends on the kind of crowd, age group that you are dealing with. But what we always this is something I've mentioned. It we don't. We just have to make sure that we do not teach these kids biases. If we do not teach them biases and we instead empower them to question the biases around us, that is what would help. Yeah, would help them, because again it is like not about including gender as a specific topic or as a specific lesson in your curriculum and discussing it only when that particular theme is being discussed. It is about being aware as an educator about the intersectionalities, about gender, about race, about caste, that you can include on your daily teachings. So today you're having a discussion on any work, let it be any work, and you decide to, okay, so for example, you go to a class and it is a science class that is happening. Usually people start a talk or start a class by saying, dear boys and girls, or dear ladies and gentlemen. What about a small switch of, if you're going to a science class, you call them dear scientists? So it is, so you do not address them by their gender, which is again very very biased, or very, what do I say, it is very polarized, right? When you say boys and girls, you are basically saying that's all that exists. There is no other gender that exists. And why should you look at people and address them by their genders? It's like looking at people and calling them high faces and eyes, or high hands and legs. It is quite absurd if you think about it. So making small such conscious switches, like going into a classroom and addressing them as dear fellow scientists or dear fellow engineers, that makes a huge difference. There you are not teaching, you are not giving them gyan, but you are already preparing them for a world that is much more inclusive, that is much more welcome and warm to live in, and which is not restrictive. So, and what else you can do is to consciously have debates, to have discussions on what particular colors mean to them, or how do you envisage gender, or how do ask them to draw what gender means to them, or ask them to draw what an engineer looks like, or what a doctor looks like, or what a dancer looks like. More often than not, they wouldn't be painting people in these gender norms. When we usually work with kids, we ask them to draw a dancer, they draw male dancers. When we ask them to draw scientists, they do draw women scientists. Or we ask them to draw and if none of them have come up with a drawing of somebody on a wheelchair, ask them why they did not think of putting somebody on a wheelchair, or of so normalize these things, bring this up in discussions, so as it is not just a topic that you deal with, but it is a way of life. Every day in routine interactions with the children, make sure that your gender biases do not come out. As long as we do not teach them gender biases, they are not going to pick it up. So let's not teach it to them in schools and educational spaces, and every time they encounter it, let's empower them to question it. That stands out to them. If there is a gender bias, they call it out. That is what I think we need to do. Yes.
Ma'am, the next question is from Nia Matthew. As educators, what can we do to help students who are bound by the four walls of the homes to reach out to people and even recognize gendered violence they might be experiencing, considering the physical distance from our students due to COVIDian protocol?
Yes, so the thing is, COVID has made things really difficult, yes, but and that's again why I told this process should have started long back, because calamities will keep happening. Maybe not just COVID, maybe it's during Kerala floods time there was a lot of cases of abuse as well. So every time a calamity strikes, it has been proven that the cases of domestic abuse and child sex abuse goes up, and all these things probably we should have been thinking about way back. But right now what we can do is basically to right now your interactions with these kids should be through online classes, and make sure that there is in these online classes, again, you just not discuss academic stuff, you also discuss about things that are happening around you, happening in the world. Tailor it for the age group that you're talking to. So choose such instances, choose characters that are relatable to them. Tell story of kids who are going through such difficult situations and what they did to overcome them. Do not scare the kids into telling you anything, but just make sure that that you introduce relatable characters and relatable stories to them from different contexts that they can that they immediately listen to and understand. Okay, then probably they will feel like opening up to you or telling them that something happened. It is also very important to use to not to use the right words. Like for example, there's this story where a child, she goes to her teacher and says, my uncle licked my cookie, and the teacher says, it's all right, it's quite all right, you need to share, it's fine, maybe get a new cookie or something. And she did not take it quite seriously. So after a few weeks after, the parent of the kids talks to the teacher saying the kid is having irritation in her genital area. And yeah, and so she mentioned that she calls her genital area cookie. And that is when the stark realization came to the teacher that the child was trying to communicate that she was being abused in the language that she know, in the words that we know, that she knew. So what we basically need to do through our classes, even if you can't ask them whether they are being abused and they can't recognize it, is to empower them with the language to tell you, to communicate to you if they are being abused. Tell them the correct words for the body organs that they have. Tell them that it is okay to say no. Do not teach them to be goody two shoes or to be everybody's darling. Tell them it's okay if you're not everybody's darling. And this needs to happen on a daily basis. No matter the kind of subject you're dealing with, find some time to introduce relatable characters, relatable stories to these kids, and empower them with the words and the knowledge to communicate to you when they want or if they are in trouble. And I think that should be a very good first step. And after that, you can work with your institution to come up with a system of maybe a periodical checkup with the kids and the parents, in a separate video call that is not monitored by the parents, to talk to them, to tell them stories, to have a laugh with them, ask them why they are gloomy, what happened in the other day, asking kids to narrate what happened the other day in their houses. All of these can give you signs. It can give you a small lens to understand what is happening with their life. So I think if we can follow all these and then come up with a proper system, it should help. First and foremost is to empower the kids with the language, with the knowledge to communicate to us when they are in trouble. And that should be the primary motive that we all have, that we should all be aiming at right now.
Okay. The next question is from Annie Maria Simon. I am part of a culture where kids are forced to show expression to love by kissing strangers and relatives. Doesn't it contribute to our understanding of right to our body and consent?
Yes, actually, so most of us were brought up in such setups where, we are forced to show that we like somebody by kissing them, even as a kid. And yes, it is wrong because consent becomes quite blurry there, because the kid, we do not know whether the kid is doing it out of love or whether the kid is being forced to do it, or whether the kid would be able to resist when this happens to them later on, or when somebody asks them to kiss them on their private parts. All of these becomes quite blurry. So what we need to do is, yes, challenge the system, and challenging the system starts at our own houses, at our own surroundings where we see these things happen. So asking or talking to kids about how it is quite okay to not kiss anybody, to not kiss somebody that they do not like, to tell them what kisses, that kiss is just an expression of love. It's just an expression of affection. So you can kiss somebody when you are happy, when you like it, and not when you're being asked. And having these normal conversations with these kids, and mostly these conversations cannot happen organically. If you call them and tell them just like that, it is going to be quite sudden for the child. So what you do is sit with them, read a story, and through the story get to the point of telling them, you know what, maybe if you, I've seen people asking you to kiss people when you don't want to, but it is quite okay. Look at this, look at Rahul is quite comfortable not kissing people when he is asked to, so you can kiss only when you like, or things like that. And this is just one example. There are many things that kids are forced to do, like some kids are, the case study that I told you about, the kid who was abused by this family friend was forced to go with the family friend to buy something from the shop, just because the child was minor and did not have the power to say no then. So just make sure that you, through relatable stories, you tell them what is okay and what is not okay, and give them the power to say no anytime that they are in an uncomfortable situation, no matter what, no matter who pressurizes them to be there. Ask them to be vocal about it, ask them to scream, ask them to say no. And I think that should help them, or that should give them a voice that is much needed. Yes.
Okay. I think this is the last question. It's from
Okay.
Victor Saha. Ma'am, what are your views about the sexist Bollywood songs which people consume and relish unabashedly without often deconstructing the lyrics?
Well, what is my view about it? It's obviously the most obvious answer is I do not like them. Yes, I do not. However, not everybody probably has the exposure to deconstruct layers of what it means, and to call it out, or to say, I do not want to be a part of this culture which comes up with such songs that objectify certain sections of the people or certain communities, or whatever. And I think that needs to happen, like on an individual basis. First you need to we have all become mindless consumers of whatever content is being thrown at us, especially during lockdown. We just want to consume everything and anything, and we want to be seen as cool, and we want to be seen as trendy. So most of the time when people put up videos of the songs, or they hum these songs in our houses, we do not really know the meaning of the songs, or we do not really think about the meaning of these songs. But being a conscious consumer is to really listen to what are the words that are being spoken, what are the videos that are being represented, what kind of ad is being shown, where they are manipulating you to buy a product, what kind of movie that you are going to watch, giving your money. And then questioning it through a Facebook post, questioning it through a letter to the brand, questioning it by asking the social media, the advertising firm who manages all these things, why did you decide to put these words? Don't you think this is sexist? By being vocal about such sexist content that is available all over. It's not just Bollywood songs, it's movies, it is books, it is advertisements, a lot of advertisements. So this content is everywhere. Yes. So what you need to do is you need to question this. You need to dislike these things. You need to not be an active consumer of this content. You need to spark conversations as much as you can in your peer groups. When people share these things, you ask them, didn't you think this was off-putting? Don't you think, maybe sometimes people did not just think about it when they shared it. Maybe your one question would actually would prompt them to be mindful consumers in the future. So you start by standing up, or questioning why they chose to put this content. And from there on, it can take any form. It can you can even file a case against the person if it is something that is going to contribute towards violence against women, or that is going to cause gendered violence. You can always put a case against them. So there are so many things that we can do, but I think it should start with yourself being a mindful consumer and questioning the people who create the creators of such vulgar or such sexist content, and then asking for the other people who share it to not share it anymore, because at the end of the day it's all about money. And yes, you have to stop making content that wouldn't make money. So let's not put our money in such content creators. Let's ban them, let's make life difficult for them, and yes, world a better place.
Okay, ma'am, I think that's all the questions we have right now. If there's anybody who needs to ask any more questions, the floor is still open.
Yeah, actually, you can also reach out to us if you want help, especially for people, victims of survivors of cyber abuse or child sexual abuse or domestic violence, especially because these are the main areas we are dealing with under lockdown, you can reach out to us at Elephant in the Room. We have a website. Our social media handle is Elephant is here. I'll comment it here. You can all follow us and you can reach out to us and tell us your personal stories or any interventions that you want. We will be guiding you through it. Yes.
All
I
right.
will just drop the thing here.
Okay. The feedback link has been posted in the chat boxes. So please ensure that you fill in the forms before 4 p.m. Moving on, thank you so much for answering the questions and being patient with all of us. And thank you, participants, for all your questions. I now invite Father Benny Thomas for the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon to all. On behalf of the Department of English, St. Stephen's College, Uravur, I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose this vote of thanks on this occasion of the third and last webinar in our national webinar series on the topic Artistic Escapades and the Psychological Landscape of the COVID-19 Pandemic. First of all, let me give glory to the Almighty God for making this series of webinars a successful and fruitful one. Then I wish to express our gratitude to the management and Ms. Lali Kesariak, Principal of St. Stephen's College, Uravur, for providing the opportunity to conduct and organize this national webinar series. Then I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Ms. Aparna Gopan, the resource person today, for her fantastic explanation of the topic, Unwrapping COVID, a pandemic of enforced silence and abuse. She rightly talked about some uncomfortable topics. That is, COVID-19 is not only a time of pandemic, but it is a time of an enforced silence and abuse, especially for women, children, and the powerless sessions of society. She was so interactive during the session and tried to explain the topic, even with the help of a few case studies, which made the participants connect the issue with the real life experiences. It was really an eye-opening session, and I hope and pray that the reflections may bring some real positive and radical changes in our society. Thank you, ma'am. We are really fortunate that you were with us today. My deep sense of appreciation and thanks go to all the participants who choose to be live with us and attend this webinar with great enthusiasm and made it a successful event. I take this opportunity to specially express my deep regards and gratitude to our HOD, Ms. Bindu Cherian, who welcomed this session, Ms. Rudy Elsa Jos and Ms. Nia Matthew, the wonderful and energetic faculties of the department who were the coordinators of this webinar series, Ms. Tina Jos, who was the moderator of this session, Ms. Ligia Mol Tangachan, Ms. Navida Jos, Mr. Jimmy James, Ms. Nisha Kumari, Lieutenant Jace Kurian, Mr. Manoj Keshot, the faculties and members of the St. Stephen's family for their unfaltering support and confidence, for the technical assistance, and also for selecting topics that really matters. Once again, I thanking you all for being with us this afternoon. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, for the vote of thanks. With that, we come to the end of our webinar series. And I hope to see you all again for the next and future programs that we hope to hold in and host in our department. Please ensure that you've all filled in the forms for the webinar so that you get your certificates, the feedback forms. I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.